What up, cucks? It's your boy, the hater, up in this motherfucker, you know what I'm saying? And I'm here to talk about Vince Russo. Now, yesterday I was scrolling around YouTube Shorts and I came across a, what's it called? A YouTube short of Vince Russo, and it was just a little tidbit from his interview that he was doing. And I thought to myself, why the hell doesn't the hater interview Vince Russo? So I got in contact with Vince Russo, and that's gonna go down at some point, motherfuckers. Now, I don't know when, because I have to sit down and actually think about the questions I want to ask this man, because he is a wealth of knowledge about wrestling, and I'm not just doing this for my fans. I'm actually curious myself to ask him certain questions and get his perspective on them. You know what I mean? So I'm getting something out of this big time, and I don't want to ruin it, motherfuckers. So I need some time to think of my questions, but rest assured that's probably going to happen unless Vince Russo pulls out. You know what I'm saying? Now, before I do that, I think that it would behoove me to explain why I like Vince Russo and why I personally dislike everyone that is against him, right? Cornette, the internet wrestling community. I dislike all of these entities because to me, Vince Russo, for better or for worse, he really exemplifies what wrestling is supposed to be. He's the reason why people like me and most kids in the 90s fell in love with wrestling, right? It's not, I mean, it's also Vince McMahon, of course, but it's definitely not Cornette and that boring-ass wrestling, nor is it Kenny Omega and that other boring-ass wrestling, right? It's the Crash TV, edgy style of understanding what is and is not cool, right? Now, reason one, motherfucks, why Vince Russo gets wrestling and other people don't. I was watching an old episode of Impact. In this episode, the first 35 to 40 minutes of the show, it's a 2-hour show, motherfucker, so they don't have 40 minutes to throw away. Imagine that shit, 40 minutes, man. That's like as much as, like, that's like half a movie, you know what I mean? So in 40 minutes, all that happens is the entrances of Jungle Boy and I think it was Darby Allin that he wrestled. And then that match happens, it takes like 38 minutes, and then there's like 5 commercial breaks. You know what I mean? In between the match and after the match, right? So once the second segment starts, we're at minute like 43 of the broadcast. Now ask yourself, let's say you're a casual viewer, and let's say you're flipping through the channels, which people still do to some extent, because now we got like YouTube TV and Hulu TV, etc., right? So you're flipping through the channels and you're like, oh, what the hell is this? It's wrestling. Oh, these guys suck. But I'll check back in a few minutes, see what else is happening here. Maybe something cool will happen. So you keep scrolling, you come back, and it's the same 2 guys. And you're like, what the fuck? These 2 guys are jobbers. Why are these guys still on TV, right? And you flip back and forth, and you see, again, Jungle Boy and Darby Allin. You're like, what the fuck? What is this? Like an Iron Man match? You know what I'm saying? Why is it taking 40 minutes? Do you remember when the Iron Man match was like a thing that you did very, 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 very rarely? And it was like this, you know, oh my God, can they even do it? Right? Now it's like a 40-minute match is not out of the ordinary at all. Certainly a 30-minute match is not, right? But that's neither here nor there, right? The idea that I'm trying to point out here is that this match was garbage because I didn't really care about the match itself, right? Maybe it was technically good, I don't care. I watched the beginning and I skipped to the finish. And as I'm skipping, I see the little vertical lines that indicate commercials. There's like 3 of them, right? Or 4 of them. So I get to the end, the finish is whatever it was, I don't even remember, right? And now it's like, all right, I've just watched 40 minutes of wrestling in 30 seconds. Great. At this rate, I can finish the episode in about 45 more seconds, cucks. So, in short, motherfucks, because it's the same thing for 45 minutes, I can just skip 43 of those 45 minutes, right? Now, compare and contrast this with the 90s Crash TV style format, where things are just being thrown at you one at a time or multiple at a time, and you don't know what the hell you're doing, so you're watching everything. You don't want to miss anything, right? So you might have like an episode of Raw, Triple H comes out, quickly, might I add, to the ring, and remember when people would complain about Triple H's entrance being too long? And now it's like, his entrance is shorter than like, you know, Bronson Reed's, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a jobber now has like, could feasibly have a longer entrance. Triple H comes out, he does his shtick, he says, I'm the champion. Then The Rock comes out, The Rock says he'll shove something up Triple H's ass. And then what happens? The segment ends. It doesn't end with them like staring at each other for 45 minutes. It doesn't end with a commercial starring The Miz and Charlotte and a little green furry ball thing that for cricket wireless. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't end like that. It just ends. You go to a commercial, a reasonable 3-minute commercial, and you come back. And then JR in like 5 seconds tells you what we just saw, in case you missed it. Triple H came out, The Rock confronted him. And then as JR is saying this, you hear like, I don't know, Steve Blackman's music, right? And Steve Blackman's already on his way coming out, right? While JR is explaining this, you hear in the background, Steve Blackman and like Crash Holly comes out or something, right? And then they have a 5-minute wrestling match, right? It doesn't matter. Who cares? It's just one more thing to talk about. Like tomorrow, when you see your friends, you might say, hey man, can you believe that Steve Blackman beat Crash Holly? And that would be the end of that. They've invested 5 minutes, you've invested 5 seconds, right? The return is 5 seconds to 5 minutes. Then this keeps going. The format continues. You have backstage segments, you have promos, you have very short matches, right? As it should be. Also, as it makes sense, right? Just like every other athletic contest, like every other kind of fight, right? Generally, it's a few minutes. You know what I mean? Like, some of them might go 12 rounds. The UFC 15 minutes is like a full fight. So, you have to consider all these things when you're setting this up. But the Vince Russo format, what it accomplishes is that, number one, it provides more opportunities for different people. If all of a sudden now, Steve Blackman and Crash Holly get 5 minutes, right? And Gangrel and Midian get 5 minutes, and Edge Christian and the Hardy Boys get 5 minutes, you've just taken care of like 8 wrestlers in 15 minutes, right? In AEW, all you've done is you've done 1/3 of a Jungle Bully and Darby Allin match. And then people are like, well, why isn't AEW getting good ratings? That's why. It's not because people are consuming wrestling differently. It's because nobody cares, motherfucks. Nobody cares. There's no variety, right? You're just watching the same shit again and again. You know, and when I say again and again, I don't mean week after week. I mean minute after minute. It's the same fucking thing, right? I just heard that they re-signed Evil Uno and Kip Sabian. What the fuck? This is literally just throwing money away at this point. Re-signing Kip Sabian is one of the dumbest things I've heard in my life. This guy has not drawn a dime in his life. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. We're talking about Vince Russo. Vince Russo understood this. He understood that there's certain things that draw and certain things that don't, right? That brings me to point 2 as to why Vince Russo gets it. Once again, motherfucks, for better or for worse, Vince Russo is what he is. He is an Italian-American boy from the neighborhood, right? In other words, he's a cool dude, all right? And when I say cool dude, I don't mean the hater wants to hang out with him. I mean, he's a cool guy in the sense that he understands what is and is not cool. He's not a nerd. He's not a geek like Jim Cornette. He's a fat geek. You understand what I'm saying? Jim Cornette can go on YouTube and say fuck this and shit that and bitch this and slut that all he wants, but he's still a fucking nerd, right? This is not disputable. He is a geek. In high school, people like Vince Russo bully like people like Jim Cornette, right? Now, with that being said, right, obviously that wouldn't be a good idea, you know, but what I'm saying here is that there's a distinction between the way that the two understand wrestling, right? Jim Cornette is a fanboy. He's like, oh, this is a great thing. Wrestling is good. Purist wrestling. Oh, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Like, just think about that name. Brutus the Barber Beefcake versus like, I don't know, like Greg Valentine was great. Nobody knows who that is. Nobody cares who that is. Vince Russo represents exactly what he claims to represent. He represents the mainstream audience. He represents that 90s style mainstream audience, right? Jim Cornette, if we listened to Jim Cornette, wrestling would still be in the territories where Dusty Rhodes would draw like 50 people to watch his fat ass. You understand what I'm saying? But because Vince McMahon and Vince Russo came around, right? They understood that, wait a second, nobody really gives a flying fuck about the wrestling. People want to see cool things. What was happening in the 90s? Cool shit was being provided to you in, I guess we'll say, unorthodox methods, in unorthodox media, right? So you had, for example, you had, what's it called? Roller derby. There's a name for it. It was like roller derby, but there was like a name. It came on after ECW on Fridays or whatever the fuck it was, right? This thing came on, right? And it was basically a roller derby, roller skating, but with storylines. And it was cool, right? People watched it. It got a lot of viewership, right? It was cool because there were storylines. It was like one team was like the young and arrogant one. You know, the other team was like the old guys who used like the four-wheel skate. There was one team who were like playboys. There was one group of women who were like total sluts. You know what I mean? It was very raunchy. You know, very like, you know, TVMA, right? Very, very TV-14, cucks, you know? So what I'm saying is, that's what the 90s were all about. And that's why all these shows got success, right? Somewhere down the line, people were like, oh, nobody wants to see. Like, I remember, I'll never forget it. I was watching some TNA, I don't know if it was pay-per-view or not, but it was like Roxy Laveau versus like someone, right? And the stipulation was whoever loses gets their head shaved. So Roxy Laveau loses, and they're shaving her head and she's crying. And people start chanting, "Fire Russo." What the fuck? Why? That's like one of the most memorable segments in TNA history. As a matter of fact, let me tell you, motherfucks. Name one other match that happened that night. Exactly. You can't. Name one other match that happened that week. You can't, right? Because the memorable things are things that stick. I don't give a shit about Roxy Laveau's haircut. You know, if she didn't want to do it, she doesn't have to agree, right? Nobody's forcing her to do it. But that kind of stuff is interesting. When you put something on the line and there's actual consequences, it's interesting, motherfucks. And that's what Vince Russo understood. A lot of people talk shit about the Judy Bagwell on a pole match. But everybody fucking remembers that shit, right? Name one other feud that was happening contemporaneously. Exactly, motherfucks. You can't. You can't. Because nobody remembers boring shit, right? Nobody remembers ancillary things. But you will always remember till the day that you die the Judy Bagwell on a pole match, which to this day is hilarious. Now, the problem is that people that think that kind of shit's hilarious, like people that like things like Opie and Anthony, people that like Andrew Dice Clay, people that like wrestling in the 90s, people that like Jerry Springer, white trash, motherfuckers, I said it. White trash and people that like lowbrow blue comedy, people like that, which is a big, big segment of the population, have not been replaced by this barely educated, fat-ass neckbeard minority of wrestling fans, right? These people that have like, I don't know, maybe they have a bachelor's degree, you know, in some bullshit, but they don't use it, right? They probably just are unemployed, living in their parents' basement, and they think that because they did 2 semesters of college, or got a 4-year degree maybe, that they're very smart. They think that they're smarter than the people that like things like Judy Bagwell on a pole match. They think they're more sophisticated. That's one thing that nobody talks about. They think they're more sophisticated. They think, that's the thing that pisses me off the most. Because intelligence is whatever. Everybody knows there's people that are blue collar that are very smart and people that are lawyers that are very dumb. We all know that just conceptually. But the sophistication part is what pisses me off. Because there's this idea that wrestling has somehow become more sophisticated. Right? Nobody talks about this. Being a smark is literally just that. It's a form of being a sophisticated wrestling fan. Oh, I don't think Sting is good. I like Konosuke Takeshita. Shut the fuck up. The only reason you're saying that is to let people know that you are not inclined to only watch the mainstream. You also like Konosuke Takeshita. But I got news for you, pal. The mainstream draws the fans. Vince Russo is the mainstream. He understood that nobody gives a rat's ass about Goldust versus Val Venus, right? Nobody gives a shit, right? It's a mid-card match that nobody's gonna want to see. But what did he do? Or whoever was in charge at that time, I'm not sure if it was him, but the point stands. They made the story about Terry Runnels and how both of these men want her, right? Val Venus wants her sexually because he's Val Venus, and Goldust is in love with her, right? And she chooses Val Venus because he's got the big Valboski. You understand what I'm saying? Right? Now, this is as lowbrow as it gets. But lowbrow drama, lowbrow storylines are the best at eliciting emotion. What do you think the Bloodline is? It's a lowbrow, like, storyline. It's something you'd see on Jerry Springer, motherfucks. That's why it's good. This is a Vince Russo-esque storyline. And then lastly, beyond all this, Vince Russo, not so much compared to Cornette, because Cornette does understand what is and is not a good wrestler, but Vince Russo really gets it. Like, you can give Vince Russo, like, if you gave him, like, 5 wrestlers, and you're like, all right, here you have Gunner from TNA, also known as, whatever, Braxton, whatever the fuck his name was, in WWE before he got fired. You give him that guy, we'll call him Gunner for now. You give him Gunner, you give him Sami Zayn, you give him Kevin Owens, you give him Lashley, and then you give him, I don't know, Noam Dar, right? Vince Russo's gonna say, okay, we're gonna fire Noam Dar, we're gonna fire Sami Zayn, we're gonna fire Kevin Owens, right? And we're gonna focus on the two guys here that actually are cool. Lashley, a former Marine, and who looks like a Greek god, And Gunner, who also is a former Marine, strangely, also looks like a Greek god and was a fucking machine gunner in the army. You understand me? Nobody's more badass than this guy, right? Some like Xavier Woods is not on the same level as someone like Gunner. They're almost a different species, motherfucks. So he'd look at Xavier Woods and he'd be like, oh, this guy brings nothing to the table. Even though Xavier Woods might, right? He might be an exception. But you understand my point. My point is that the vetting process starts before the wrestler is presented to us. The reason why Kevin Owens shouldn't be in WWE is not because Kevin Owens sucks when he's on TV. It's because you look at him and you're like, this guy's gonna add nothing, he's gonna draw 0 dimes, right? Vince Russo was good at that, and he was good at booking the show. He's an entertainment guy, he's a mainstream guy. And that is what makes wrestling good, and not just wrestling. That's what makes Jerry Springer good. That's what makes Roller Crash, whatever the fuck it was called, good. That's what makes TV good. Small segments that are high in number. A lot of times people say, well, AEW's got 200 employees, 200 wrestlers, and about 20 of them go on TV every week. Oh, there's not enough time. Yeah, of course there isn't enough time. If you spend 40 minutes of that time focusing on 2 wrestlers, Darby Allin and Jungle Boy, then yeah, of course. Now you gotta cram 28 wrestlers in an hour and 20 minutes. You understand what I'm saying? Versus, you could have even 300 wrestlers, but if you cram 70 of them in 1 hour, right? In actual discernible segments, you could actually have some success, right? Think about it. The whole hardcore title 24/7 thing was exactly that. It was like, shit, we got no room for these guys. Put them in the hardcore title thing. It's at least fun, right? They tried capturing this with the 24 hours title, but that was stupid. But anyways, motherfuckers, that's why Vince Russo rules. He really gets it, and a lot of people don't.